Hello, I'm Mark Ellen. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of conversations David Hepworth and I have had on this podcast we started 17 years ago. Some with ourselves, others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you enjoy them and want to support us and keep it all coming and get extra entertainment, including the weekly quiz and a special event on your birthday, visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear or just like or subscribe in whatever way you prefer.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So, Mark, who's just had the biggest payday in the history of show business? Is it Taylor Swift? Is it P. Diddy? Is it Timothy Chalamet? Who is it, Mark? Who is it? Who's just had, by far, the biggest payday in the entire history of show business?
Have they sold the catalogue?
And here I include Elvis Presley, the Beatles, Jack Nicholson appearing in Batman, all those things. This deal just completely puts them all in the shade.
Go on.
Shall I tell you?
Yeah.
Melania Trump has just signed a deal with Amazon Prime for $40 million to put her name on a program that takes you inside the world of Melania Trump.
Oh,
$40 million. Now, that's taking place. That's taking place at the same time as her husband. I don't even notice this. Has been ever since he was, he won the election. He has been down at Mar-a-Lago with a huge, great big bag into which billionaires have been shoveling staggering amounts of cash, none of which they expect to go anywhere except in the skyrocket of Donald J. Trump, okay? And this is taking place in a situation absolutely unique in the history of America, because all the authorities who might be expected traditionally to take a dim view of this have all decided they're going to look the other way. And here I include the Supreme Court, the legal establishment, and the entire media establishment have all said, no, that's fine. In fact, said media establishment have been foremost in the queue, going up, shoveling doubloons.
Shoveling the cash.
Into this
also, if they
massive,
did object, they wouldn't dare do it for fear of repercussions. So.
This massive, great bag. We have never seen anything like this scale of personal enrichment. It is absolutely mind-boggling what is going on at the moment. And have you noticed the latest detail? I thought this was appeal to you as a student of showbiz. Have you noticed that the inauguration has now been taken indoors?
Yes, it has.
It is no longer going to be outdoors, because he claims he's rather worried that people might be rather pinched by the northern gales, the inclement weather that is predicted for Washington on Monday or whenever it takes place. This is not the reason at all. This is for one reason and one reason only. A reason that will
control the broadcast.
No, Mark. Think about it. What was his personal obsession back in 2016 when he was first inaugurated?
Stop his hair getting blown in the wind.
No, Mark. What do you remember? What do you remember? What was the big story for like 3 weeks afterwards? What did he send his press spokesman to the microphone again and again to lie about? That was the size of the crowd.
Oh, yeah.
He was absolutely obsessed with the size of the crowd. And he clearly is worried that the crowd on Monday won't be big enough. So rather than risk, this is just staggering in itself. This is the most powerful man in the world. This is a man who's just been returned as president of the United States, and he's still so worried that the House won't be full on the evening and that people will be able to hunt buffalo in the cheaper seats, you know what I mean? Because there won't be people in there.
It was a huge story, wasn't it? Do you remember the aerial shot?
Massive story. Massive. They had estimating, technology, trying to work out how many people were there and how it compared with our armors and whatever. Anyway, no, this is going to take place indoors with just about 200
You know the great irony about that?
Go on.
That's the shot, the famous shot of the kind of shaman with the fur hat and the horns. Do you remember the guy who was one of the kind of gang leaders of the break-in into the building?
Yeah.
That guy was pictured, wasn't he, in that very seat, in that very room. So it's rather bizarre to think that that's where he'll be.
So when I read the story that he decided that it was going to go all indoors, and it clearly has to come from him. Because nobody on his team would have dared say, I tell you, Mr. President, instead of having the normal, all bells and whistles, millions of people outdoors, let's just go inside and have a little intimate. He would never have taken that in a million years. It's clearly all come from him, because he is, underneath it all, just like the manager of Spinal Tap. He's a frightened creature. Do you remember what the manager of Spinal Tap famously said in the interview with Rob Reiner, who said, you previously played 10,000-seater arenas. Now this current
our appeal is becoming more selective.
Our appeal is becoming more selective. Just remember that. Our appeal is becoming more selective. That's enough of that. Let's talk about pop music.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
Right, we're joined by Alex. We have to be joined by Alex whenever we want to talk about TikTok. What's happening with TikTok, Alex? I understand it's going off the air, so to speak.
It is. It's been banned in the USA. As of today, it's gone completely offline over there. So users of the app cannot access the app. If they try to open it, they're greeted with a message saying it's been taken down. However, President Trump has indicated that he'll try to get it back on once he's in office, so stay tuned.
Oh, right. It'd probably be put back on halfway through his inauguration speech.
Yeah.
It's a classic thing. It's going to be, it's just going to be like nighttime television. But I mean, if TikTok stayed, away, this would be very significant for pop music, wouldn't it, Alex? Why?
Well, it's probably the biggest thing to happen to the music industry in years and years and years and years, because it's the route via which hits are seeded these days.
So it's more important than radio nowadays. TikTok is...
Absolutely, without a shadow of doubt. Well, the thing is, kids don't really listen to radio at all anymore.
They certainly don't appear to. Go on.
They're all on TikTok, and they discover music via viral trends. And there was a study, I think this study was conducted by TikTok actually, but it suggested that most of the number one hits globally in 2024 had something to do with TikTok and viral trends. So it's a huge, huge, huge boom for the music industry. And also, in terms of labels and their marketing strategies, those are going to have to completely shift now because, instead of spending money on billboards and radio advertising and things like that, labels and artist teams are putting all the budget into TikTok advertising and leveraging the platform because they know that's where users will discover and hold on to their content. It provides the most surefire way of gauging a song's sort of stickiness and engagement and reach.
So if you for people who want to launch a career on TikTok, obviously that's going to be a catastrophe. But what about people who did launch a career on TikTok and are maintaining and sustaining a career on TikTok? I mean, what will they do in order to keep themselves in the frame?
Well, there's been a huge furore because obviously it's not just music creators that use these social platforms. It's influencers of all varying kinds. That kind of demographic is so fragmented and split these days. So there's been a huge uproar. And what a lot of them were doing as an act of rebellion is signing up to an app called Red Note, which is Chinese owned.
But not the government, allegedly.
And migrating over there. And apparently, Red Note was, still apparently the number one app on the US App Store as we speak. So there's a mass migration over there. Whether that will last is anyone's guess. But, effectively, if you build up, creators tend to focus on one platform, and they might have a presence on multiple platforms. But the byword for being a social media influencer really is use one platform, use it really, really well. So a lot of these influencers and artists will have built up followers of hundreds of thousands or millions on this platform that they'll suddenly not be able to leverage, and effectively will have to start again. Another thing about TikTok is it's the most creator friendly platform out there, so it's the easiest one for creators to monetize. So for a lot of them, it is their bread and butter, and it is it is effectively their job. And doing the same thing on Instagram, for example, isn't quite as easy because it's not it doesn't lend itself quite as friendlily to, for want of a better word, towards creators building a career.
Yeah, the interesting thing about TikTok, which I've occasionally kind of dabbled in and then kind of staggered back from because I just find it bewildering, is it's kind of cheap and cheerful, isn't it? That's the appeal, isn't it? The way things are done on TikTok. There's no premium on polish on TikTok, is there at all?
No, the more candid, the better.
Yes,
absolutely. It's quick, it's easy. That's what it's built on. And Instagram Reels kind of do the same thing, but it's not the same. And in fact, Instagram Reels was built as a competitor for TikTok. Yeah. So, and another thing is, for labels, it's a big monetization tool because obviously, Universal Music, for example, made a huge deal with TikTok after taking all of its content down for 3 months earlier last year.
Of course.
So in terms of label and publisher revenue, it's going to hit the industry very, very hard. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some music industry lobbying to get it back up and running ASAP.
Absolutely, but it's kind of it's on a bigger scale, isn't it?
Whether it'll have any effect,
It dwarfs the music business, doesn't it? I can't think of anything in my lifetime of kind of looking at pop music or monitoring pop music where a single kind of governmental act has had such a dramatic effect on one whole leg of the industry. It's absolutely extraordinary. So, Mark, what were you saying about Bob Dylan and TikTok?
You probably noticed this, but this is just one of those fantastically Dylan-esque stories that Dylan has just joined TikTok. I mean, Dylan clearly has somebody who posts for him, but the post that announces that he's joined acknowledges that he's in on the joke because it has a little clip from a press conference back in about 65, I think, where he just says, "Good God, I must leave right away." He's obviously been asked a question that he can't answer or whatever. So he's acknowledging that it's a daft time to appear. I mean, it may just be one of those things where it's Dylan's organization doing precisely as ever the polar opposite of what you might expect anybody to do. And also he's capitalizing on the success of and the amount of publicity that A Complete Unknown, the biopic, is getting, So he's got every interest in promoting the idea of Bob Dylan. And I do notice that his streams have gone up from 8 million a week, I think, to 20 million. But the interesting thing about that is that I thought he'd sold his catalogue. So how much profit would he receive?
Well, who knows? I think I'm sure he'll still make royalties from things, won't he?
Yeah.
He just sold the copyrights, I suppose. I don't know, but it's fascinating, that TikTok can be so enormous.
Yeah,
over quite a short period of time, Alex, isn't it? How many years has it been there?
Oh man, it can't be much over 5, I don't think.
It's absolutely extraordinary. And, hugely powerful and important to people putting out records, and if you call them records, but kind of not apparent at all to anybody outside. really. You know what I mean? If you're in that world, you know about it. And if you're not in that world, you don't know about it at all, do you?
It's a completely self-contained unit, yeah. But it's altered the paradigm of the music industry irreversibly, and this is the channel via which people discover their new favorite artists now and rediscover old ones. The Kate Bush Stranger Things,
Fleetwood Mac, Fleetwood Mac, whatever it was, Dreams, wasn't it? The skateboarding clip and so forth. So it's kind of interesting when this is happening, to think about, as we do very occasionally, music radio, which, what was it say? What are you saying, Mark? It was the 30-year anniversary of the Matthew Bannister shake-up at Radio 1, is that right?
Yeah, it was. It was 1995 January, I think. Do you remember? I mean, I remember what a big thing it was at the time. Matthew Bannister and Trevor Dan had kind of taken over control, and their job was that research had shown that Radio 1's profile was greatest, I think, among 30 to 45-year-olds, because those are the people who were listening to Radio 1 years before and just not stopped doing it, and they wanted to kind of reposition the whole network as a kind of younger, with a younger appeal, And I just remember at the time it was such a big story. Do you remember that Dave Lee Travis resigned on air, didn't he? And
Absolutely.
He said, there are changes being made at the station that go against my principles, i.e. they want to throw me out. Simon Bates was resigned very soon afterwards, or was booted out, or whatever. Adrian Just, Bruno Brooks. It was the whole smashy and nicey era, wasn't it? Radio 1 had incredibly bad kind of image, largely influenced by that sketch, actually. And they were just trying to clear it all out. And they brought in Danny Baker doing the breakfast show. Do you remember that? Danny Baker would come in 6 o'clock in the morning playing the Ramones, broadcasting standing up, playing the Ramones. And I think it was Simon Bates who said, I came in after his first show and I had to pick the show up from the floor and try and get it, which is complete nonsense because, of course, Danny Baker had done a fantastic job at re-energizing it. Emma Freud came in, Chris Evans. And then eventually Nicky Campbell and Mark Goodyear and all those guys were out too. So it was just a really, really big, I remember it just being a big issue that people were very caught up on it. And now it seems so extraordinary seeing that so few people are listening to it. And actually, ultimately, they did make the audience younger, but they, of course, lost a load of people at the top end. And so
I never know about this whole... I never know about this whole business of trying to make your audience younger. I think it's really, really hard to do with anything, with a magazine.
The most significant thing was that Bannister announced they were going to have going to not play any music before 1990. And there was that ridiculous thing where Status Quo, I'm sure this was utterly bogus, appeared outside of Broadcasting House. Do you remember? Saying that they'd taken a legal action against Radio 1 because they wanted them to play their new single, which was Fun, Fun, Fun by the Beach Boys, actually, I think recorded with the Beach Boys, and that was no longer part of the remit and it wouldn't be played. And actually, Radio 1 did relax it, and eventually they allowed some early 80s records on there. But it was just an extraordinary thing, the idea that you could come in and say, by not playing any music before 1990, we will give this station younger appeal. But of course, we now know, or we knew anyway at the time, that actually a lot of the stuff that people were listening to of that age group they were trying to attract was stuff that was recorded much earlier. It just was.
But it's changed so much now, hasn't it? That it's like Alex says. I mean, find me a young person who listens to the radio.
I know.
There can't be any. Our youngest daughter said to me only yesterday, she says, I see a bloke every morning on my way to work or whatever. It's either Chris Evans or Chris Moyles. She wasn't really sure which one it was. And I had to describe what Chris Evans looked like and what Chris Moyles looked like. And she decided it was Chris Evans. You know what I mean? Now, that is just an extraordinary reflection on media profiles in our time. Now, I know Chris Evans was massively famous because of Don't Forget Your Toothbrush and TFI Friday and all those things, but also massively famous by being on the radio. Everybody knew who was on the radio. And so the smashy and nicey joke could only work when applied to a load of people who were massively famous.
Yeah.
You couldn't make that joke any longer because
And
those
whose
people aren't
characteristics and
those people aren't famous anymore. You know what I mean? If you would make a joke about whoever is doing the breakfast program on Radio 1 nowadays, it wouldn't work at all because nobody knows who is doing the breakfast program on Radio 1. You know, they don't have the same kind of stature. And it's also the great truth, I think, about DJs and everything else is that the things people hate you for are the same things they love you for. So they hated those people because they were kind of awful and vulgar, but also they liked them because they were awful and vulgar. You know what I mean? Whereas if you go off and say, well, get rid of all the characteristics that people find upsetting about DJs, what are you left with? Nothing at all, you know, just an announcer who pops up every now and again, you know, who people seem to
it's
find
those catchphrases
easy to live without.
Absolutely, wasn't it?
It's all that corniness. It's Arnold the dog, all that kind of stuff, you know. So with TikToks, well, it's not off the air in Britain, is it? But you know this is only in the United States.
Well, I think Taiwan took it off the air a couple of years ago, so it has been banned in other countries. But no, in Britain and Europe, it's still online. But whether they follow suit is anyone's guess. But my money is on it being reinstated at some point in the near future because its impact is just too great for the wider entertainment industry.
You heard it here first.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
Well, I sense you're in rant mode, Dave, which it really brings back
coming in off my
Andy
long run, you know, as we like to say.
That's right. It brings back memories of Andy Gill. Do you remember Andy Gill? We worked with at Word and at Q and Mojo and stuff. The late Andy Gill, fantastic journalist. And Andy Gill just used to get wound up about things. I can remember Paul Denier and I used to sit in the office. We could sense one of his rants coming on, and we'd go, "Any goats need getting, sir?" And Andy would then fire off about somebody on the bus or some pretentious review of the new Lieback box set that had appeared in the Wire magazine, or a terrible single by Sting or something, you know. But anyway, I'm feeling the same about you, because in terms of rants, because you and I have been having conversations about Virtually Parkinson. And I should just very briefly recap for anyone who doesn't know what this is. Parkinson, well, Parky, you know, obviously in Britain, huge institution, his chat show. And I remember at the time thinking he was rather smug and rather pleased with himself. But as I got older and became a journalist, I realized how fantastically good he was. Parky did this amazing show, just bringing out the best in just a huge variety of different celebrities. And the story is that a company called Deep Fusion, run by a guy called Ben Field, had developed a film about Jerry Anderson. I think it's called Jerry Anderson: A Life Uncharted, which was in which they used they worked out from archive footage a kind of AI version of Jerry Anderson's voice and brought him back to screen to discuss his life and career. And Mike Parkinson, who is Michael Parkinson's son, who worked on with the program for a while and now is the controller of the archive, isn't he, of the Parkinson archive, obviously saw this and just thought it might be good to try and do something the same to reactivate my father's archive. So they met up, and at the end of the meeting they decided there was no point. What was the point of doing this AI version of Parkinson? Somehow they've changed their mind, haven't they? And they've produced a program called Virtually Parkinson, and the idea is that celebrities are interviewed by an AI Parkinson voice, which is incredibly convincing. I mean, it's got all his tics and his vocal catches, and it does sound exactly like him. And the first one of these interviews is up. It's with a guy called Jason Derulo, who's you know, Dave, I'm really sorry, I wasn't particularly aware of him, but he's an American singer, isn't he? And you know, listening to this, I only managed about 10 minutes of it. It is literally the most boring interview. I'm just trying to find the opening question is so phenomenal. He says, the opening question is, growing up in Miami with your Haitian heritage, how does your upbringing influence the way you approach music and your career? That's the opening salvo. The most exciting bits of the 10 minutes I listened to, it's just agonizingly boring, where he talks about learning to sight read, suffering from asthma, and at one point the joy of routine. And he says, I wake up at the same time, I eat at the same time, I work at the same time, and I go to bed at the same time. These are the highlights, by the way, of an interview conducted by the AI Michael Parkinson. It's just breathtakingly awful, Dave, is it not?
It's mind-bogglingly terrible. It is genuinely, steps back in amazement, breathtakingly awful. This has been contrived by not one person, but a whole panel of people have put their heads together in order to try and replicate what they see as the magic of Parkinson without for a single second beginning to understand what could possibly be the magic of Parkinson, or what Parkinson was paid to do, and what he did very successfully for a long period of time, which was run a TV program for ages. They think it's something that can be reduced to its constituent parts and reassembled by some kind of team. And boy, are they mistaken. Because the obvious point is that if you've ever interviewed people in any shape or form, whether on stage at some literature festival or in the exalted circumstances that Michael Parkinson did it, you will have realized that the key interviewer's question is always the same one, and it's always the same 3 words, and it goes as follows. You may want to write this down if you've never done this before. Have you got a pencil? Write this down. This is the only question you need in order to interview people. It is, in what way? Okay? In what way? And that question
give me another example, isn't it?
Can only be logged in as a response to the first answer. It's a follow-up to the first answer. By definition, if you set up an AI version of it, you have no way of doing that.
No, but
because the interview. Go on.
Because I reading a thing in The Guardian about this, they're saying that that according to them, the Michael Parkinson AI entity is reactive. Well, listening to this thing, I would say that is not true. It's simply not true, because if you're reactive, somebody ends their sentence by saying, and of course I'm plagued by these, by these recurring dreams about that I have about Madonna and Vladimir Putin. And if that was an AI Parkinson interview, then the next question would be, when you were 16, you had terrible asthma and it must have affected you. He would not be able to pick up on, because any journalist would your job is to find anything interesting that you could, hang on, let me stop you there.
Just stop me a second.
What do you mean by that? What dream? What happens in the dream? Why are you having that dream?
Particularly, Mark, particularly on television. Because, let's not forget, Michael Parkinson was not an interviewer. He was a TV host. He was there to do a different job, which is, you've got a guest, they're going to come on, they're going to do 8 minutes, you've got to get 6 really good laughs out of them, and some poignant point, and you've got to get the best laugh near the end of it. It's got to feel like an experience. It's not something that can be reduced to a load of questions. It's not. Nobody ever came away from the Parkinson show thinking, "Oh, he really hit him with that question about the third album, didn't he?" Nobody's bothered about that at all. They just bothered about having a congenial experience.
About your mum, or growing up, or the first time you ever went on stage.
The way he did that was nothing to do with the questions. It's all to do with personality, the persona, and it's all to do with the crinkled face and the kind of raised eyebrow and the way he'd button his jacket and all that kind of stuff. His body language is an immensely important part of this stuff. And here's my point, Mark. After all, what is the quality that Parkinson or any interviewer in that kind of situation is expected to generate? What is the magical element that is expected to generate again and again and again, which no AI ever invented will ever be able to generate, and that's this: rapport. Okay? Rapport is the only thing that matters. It's with those odd seconds where interviewer and subject are suddenly kind of on the same wavelength. Doesn't last for long, but it's there. You cannot do that automatically. And I don't say this, I'm not arguing for more jobs for the kind of sacred ancient order of interviewers. I couldn't give a stuff about that at all. What I resent about this is that everybody involved in it has clearly completely insulting ignorance of what it is that interviewers do. They don't understand what it is that they do. So how can they possibly replicate it?
It is fantastically insulting. And I noticed that Monty Don, who was the second person at the interview, we haven't seen that or heard the results of that yet, but Monty Don was then interviewed about it afterwards. And this is really damaging because the least you could do in circumstances like that, with a whole new venture and people have got a lot of fondness towards the Parkinson archive, etc., is to say, well, it was really interesting. It's a really new experience and I'm looking forward to hearing the results or whatever. But no, Monty Don said it became less and less enthralling. And he said he was disappointed by it. He found it really hard. And the interviewer in The Guardian says, well, why? He says, well, look, I'm talking to you now. And as I'm talking to you, I can see your face and I can see your eyebrows raised. I can see a reaction. I can see something that's suggesting that you're interested or not interested in what I've got to say. He said, can you imagine what it's like talking to an invisible entity? And actually, it struck me listening to that thing with Jason Derulo that it's just no different from being interviewed by email, really. It's just a series of questions that you've got to answer. And at the end of each one, there is an absolute dead air because there's no response. And the other thing you miss is the audience. If you're interviewing in front of an audience, that's another device that makes
the most important device.
Yeah, that you're then going in the right direction. Oh, that got a laugh. Well, I'll do more of that. I'll head in that direction because obviously people love it, not just Parkinson.
They are comedy shows, most of those things. They are comedy shows. That's how Graham Norton... How does Graham Norton know if his show's successful? The audience have laughed. It's simple as that. Has it felt warm and, entertaining? Listen, I don't want to be too hard on this, but let's just all look away now and let them take every last bit of this experiment and bury it in a lead-lined box at the bottom of the deepest ocean. And while we're looking away, let everybody involved with it just simply agree to just retreat and just wander the ends of the earth, ringing a bell for the rest of their lives to indicate the level of shame that should attend this and all their works.
And we shall never speak of it again.
The Word Podcast, 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
So there's a piece in the Financial Times. The Financial Times, Mark, for crying out loud, about what's it called? The world's greatest record stores. Now, I like the Financial Times. The Financial Times is a very good newspaper. I'm not knocking it at all. But where the bloody hell does it get off telling us what is the world's greatest record stores? Have you seen this, Mark?
I have.
Have you seen it? And what did you think of it?
Well, they've picked on 5 or 6 of them, and they're little
more than 5 or 6. It's about 20.
Oh,
they've all around the world.
They pick on these tiny little places. That I'm trying to give you some examples here. There's one called Andra Jazz in Stockholm, which has choice cuts by Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Charles Mingus, and more obscure artists. I love that, obscure, because we like obscure, And there's one in another one in Sweden which has vinyls. Vinyls, film posters, and Dinky Toys. So what you're realizing immediately is that these are not record shops. There's one quite near me, and I don't want to in any way say the same thing about them, but they're full of lovely little objects. They're kind of they've got sort of, I don't know, old crockery, and they've got bits of antique furniture, and they've got Art Deco lampshades, haven't they? And then suddenly they've got a load of Charles Mingus albums, and these are probably being bought by people, to be honest, who don't even have record players, but they like the sleeves, and there's nothing wrong with that. And they like these objects to litter around and give the impression that they're a kind of fabulously cultured and cool person. The other thing that struck me was that it's an old magazine trick that you put features in the magazines to make people feel good about who they are and the money they've got and what they can be spending that money on. It's like the whole idea about travel pieces about, spotless white sand beaches in the Caribbean that you're never going to go to, but you like being flattered into thinking you could afford to do it. Or if homemaking magazines always used to have pieces about, which are designed for people buying posh sinks and wallpaper who live in, in Knightsbridge. And they'd always have pieces about rustic farm cottages and thatched cottages you could go and live in, and it's that kind of fantasy. Oh, that's the kind of person I am. This is the same. I think Financial Times readers do not want to think of themselves as just entirely kind of corporate number crunchers. They want to kind of think of themselves as cool people whose idea of a local record shop actually could be in Sweden, or it could be in Paris, or it could be because that's the kind of person I am. I'm traveling all the time.
I think it says.
Of that.
I think it says in the intro to the piece. It says we asked 20 of our Financial Times people to tell us where they went to pursue their vinyl fix, and I thought, come on, I've got more records than all you guys put together. I don't have a vinyl fix.
No.
Nobody has a vinyl fix, apart from a bunch of posers who'd like to think that they have a vinyl fix. It's like you said, 50%, it bears repeating, 50% of the people who buy vinyl in the United States have no means to play that vinyl on. It's an ornament, It's a thing to put on a shelf. It's a thing to carry under your arm. There's nothing wrong with that in its way, but stop trying to pretend that it's more than that. It's not.
They're not record shops.
They're not record shops.
They're antique shops.
A record shop, absolutely. A record shop. Stop me if I'm going too quick for anybody, if I'm getting too scientific here. But a record shop ought to be a place that you can go in and you can ask for something, and you'd have the reasonable expectation they would have it. Yes, if you want them to Adele album, they would have it. Or these places wouldn't at all. They've got what they've got, which is the stuff that they feel comfortable with, and the things they feel cool about. And also, you mentioned the Miles Davis thing. I read one of those pieces this morning. It says this shop has everything from Miles Davis to really obscure stuff like Zoot Sims. I thought, to who is Zoot Sims obscure? I'll tell you who is obscure to. People who don't know the fucking first thing about jazz. It's just an absolutely ridiculous thing to say. It's like saying to obscure rock like Joy Division or something. You know what I mean? It's just that they've kind of redrawn this to suit themselves. They're not.
It's a bit like that whole thing of people who wear T-shirts, and you wonder if they can name the members of the group who are on their T-shirt, or they just like the concept of the band whose T-shirt they're wearing. It's people who have copies of Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. And you kind of want to say, well, of the four soloists on So What, which is the one you think does the best solo? Because I'm not sure. Do they necessarily play these records, or do they just like having them littered around the living room, saying the right things about them?
Absolutely, but it's just that. This FT feature, it's got 20 pictures of all these different places, and they're all in, artful holes in the wall in kind of bohemian areas of cities all over the world or whatever. And of course, it still continues to amaze me. When record shops were on every corner, nobody took a picture of them ever, ever, ever. Go back.
Yeah.
And find me a picture of the Virgin Megastore in wherever, Leeds, or, when these places used to be on every high street, nobody took pictures of them. Now that they're just poked away in particular cobbled lanes, in particular county towns, people are forever bloody taking pictures of things. You think it's just it seems just a belated recognition of the fact that they're largely there just for what they look like, rather than for doing any service for anybody.
Precisely with the same attitude to the records, isn't it?
Well, also, if you're interested in selling music, sell CDs, for crying out loud. Because there's more of them than there is of vinyl. But it's just become a thing of its own. Anyway, I don't wish any ill on the Financial Times, which I think is a fine newspaper. And if they want to sponsor a future edition of Word in Your Ear, I'm sure we'd be only too happy to take their money. Well, I certainly would, Mark. But just don't come it with the world's greatest record stores. Okay? Stick to your lane.
The Word Podcast, driving the digital kids to school since 2007.
Just before we wrap up, we've got a live show, I suppose, on the 27th at 21 Soho, David Bowie in Hollywood and London. That's now sold out, so we're looking forward to seeing many of you there. What else we've been doing in this last week? Francis Rossi, Mark. It's always a pleasure to talk to Francis Rossi.
He was fantastic, wasn't he?
Wasn't he great?
Wind him up. Let him go.
Wind him up and let him go.
He was really fantastic. Just really eccentric and interesting bloke. Really characterful. He's doing a whole tour, isn't he, of storytelling and songs, as so many people are. Graham Nash, I think, did a bit of the same, actually. We talked about
he is very much
fantastic. It's just wonderful. Really on it, and just told this great story about the talent contest he played in 1959 when he was on the same bill as Johnny and the Moondogs, a.k.a. the Beatles, and beat them. He was really good value. Yeah. And we got various people we're talking to next week, so we should be plugging those in a week's time.
And if you're, as ever, if you thought about, if you want to support this endeavour, which, as you've been able to witness this morning, is of massive cultural and political significance. If you want to do your bit, you could consider being a Patreon supporter. And if you want to know how you might do that, if you go to patreon.com/wordinyour-ear and find the appropriate way you could be involved. And if you're involved in the birthday tier, you could be here one week on the week of your birthday, throwing your own personal log on the Word in Your Ear fire. And that particular honour fell this week to
Paul Knox, who talked about the magic of the various compilation albums. Very interestingly.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
And as regular listeners know, if you're a subscriber to our birthday tier, you get to be on the podcast and join in the conversation with a question. And your question, we're joined now by Paul Knox. Happy birthday, firstly. When was it?
It was on Wednesday.
And how was it celebrated?
It was celebrated by a day at work, but no, I had a nice dinner last night.
Yay! Result.
Yeah, nice dinner and a few mini celebrations during the week. So yeah, no, it was remembered.
Very nice. So Paul, you've got a query or a thought you wanted to.
To add. Well, I mean, I'm in Hong Kong and I've left all my CDs and vinyl behind in the UK. So I really rely on streaming, and streaming is great for albums by individual artists or groups or whatever. But over the years, I've had many albums which were favourites, which were compilations or various artists' albums. And these tend not to turn up on streaming. So there are various different categories. One would be, for example, soundtracks. So more the pop soundtrack type album. So when I was young, there were things like the soundtracks to That'll Be the Day and Stardust, which I really liked, and they were my introduction to the music of the 50s and 60s. But even something which is a different type of soundtrack album, Woodstock. When you look on the streaming, like Spotify, you'll get lots of playlists which will be sort of Woodstock themed.
Yeah.
But you just get random songs that are kind of affiliated, but you don't get the stage announcements, which to me are kind of the crucial part of
Absolutely.
Of Woodstock.
New York State freeways closed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The brown acid that's circulating around is specifically not too good.
Not specifically too good.
Yeah. And then there were the kind of the sampler albums like the Rock Machine ones. And again, people have tried to do playlists, but because some of the songs aren't available, like for example, My name is Jack. I think it was by John Simon originally, and I really like his version. But on the playlist, you'll get the Manfred Mann version, which is good, but it's much more kind of poppy. And then you get sort of the cover albums. So there was one called The Songs of Bob Dylan, which came out years ago. And that had things on it like a really great version of a song, which doesn't actually appear on any of Dylan's proper albums, called Abandoned Love. And there's just a fantastic version by the Everly Brothers. So you get these sorts of things which you never find on, let's say, the streaming sites. So I just wonder, I mean, the playlists have come in, and clearly from what's available, that's great. But there are so many great sort of compilation albums over the years. And I just wonder if you think that they're sort of an underrated genre, like I do.
Well, God,
I think they're a kind of forgotten genre, actually. I think it's only when you go through that list as you've gone through there that you're reminded once again how important they were. Things like That'll Be the Day, as you say, and Stardust, and and American Graffiti, and those kind of things, which because those records had a kind of point of view, didn't they? There was a sort of editorial attitude implicit in those kind of recordings, which it massively enhanced your enjoyment of them. So it's all very well having all the individual tracks, but it is a thing where it benefits massively from you seeing the edit and seeing the cover and all that kind of thing, and realizing what's coming up next, and kind of following the story through it. I have to say I've got a vested interest in this because I've just done another compilation with Demon, More Deep 70s, which comes out soon with 4 CDs and booklet and so forth. And you try and make it as book-like as an experience as possible, And I think that's the side of it that I kind of particularly miss. And you look at the other really significant things like Lenny Kaye's Nuggets, which effectively invented a genre,
It sort of invented kind of indie, really, did it?
It sort of invented indie in the weirdest possible way, and that was a consequence of Lenny Kaye's kind of very learned approach to it, and also the way it was packaged, which was hugely important, And
they were a bit like programs, I think, a bit like television programs or something. Because for me, Nice Enough to Eat, Bumpers, You Can All Join In, Fill Your Head with Rock. Those things were like what would now be the equivalent of a kind of BBC4 rock music program about a particular genre. But one I really remember was, do you remember the contemporary guitar sampler, Dave? That was fantastic.
Oh, right.
God, that was wonderful. We had Bert Jansch and John Renbourn and
Transatlantic.
John Fay. It's where I discovered John Fay.
I'd forgotten about that totally.
Oh yeah, I dug my copy out this morning. It's absolutely amazing, and it's got.
And that was cheap, wasn't it? I can remember that. God, I haven't thought of that in 40 years. It's extraordinary. There it is.
I dug it out this morning and had a look at it. It's there are two. It was so successful. There was another edition. I've got them both. Actually. It's fantastic. Yeah. That's how I discovered people like John Fay, particularly Bert Jansch and John Renbourn. It was just like a kind of folk program, and you became besotted by all of them because you just felt they all belonged together, And they were really, they converted me. Very important.
So I don't know, will they ever come back? I suppose it depends on the kind of, ultimately, whether you believe that there's a comeback for the CD, I would have thought, as much as anything else, And some people do, that if the CD doesn't survive, physical product doesn't really survive because vinyl will, only.
But are your new CDs coming out on? Will they be streamed, or is it only?
No, you see, because you can't. Those tracks, probably lots of them will be streamed, but Demon, as the kind of compiler, they do a deal with the rights holders to sell, CDs of that compilation for this particular period of time. They don't suddenly, have streaming rights over them, any more than you'd expect.
Also, it works in the context of that package, doesn't it, Dave? Because it works with your notes about each track and your explanations and your thoughts about it. That's what makes it.
The one piece of advice I would throw in here is, if you don't find tracks on Spotify, and I agree with you, it happens, go on YouTube, and very often you'll find somebody is just, they've copied the original album. It's on YouTube. with
You're right. It
probably
is on
watch it
YouTube.
going round, you know.
Yeah, it is on YouTube. But I always find watching things on YouTube is a bit like playing an old single. It's you have to type in, find it, and you can listen to that one song, but it's in isolation, and you're not listening to it.
Oh, well, I was going to say, because I would have thought lots of people put legendary samplers. Yeah, I would imagine, I don't know, if I went and looked at Berserkly Chartbusters Volume 1, it would probably be there on
Great
YouTube.
record.
And you would actually watch somebody lowering a tone arm onto side
You
one.
get the Reuben Ooze, Greg Keane, Earthquake, and Jonathan Richmond.
Jonathan Richmond.
To be honest, I have been looking like that because there were some great tribute albums in the 1990s. There was one which was the Noel Card one, which the Pet Shop Boys did. 20th
Yes,
Century
of
Blues.
course.
yes, brilliant.
Yes.
And there was one, the
Stage Show,
Red Hot and Blue album.
Yes,
With,
the AIDS.
But if you type in an individual song, maybe I've been doing this wrong, you just get that song.
Oh, right. No, go and look for the compilation, I would have thought.
Okay.
Actually, the Noel Coward one is a really good idea because that's got a fantastic version by the Divine Comedy of I've Been to a Master's
Party.
Yeah,
which I haven't heard. I haven't heard in years. And in fact, once this conversation's over, I'm going to go and listen to it. Absolutely brilliant.
And a fantastic version of There Are Bad Times Just Around the Corner by Robbie Williams.
Which is it's ready for a timely reissue. I would have thought the whole thing. So, well, look, thanks very much for sharing that thought with us, and I hope we've sent other people away to find the compilation from the dark corners of their record collection.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.